Well, it's nonsense, because if you keep going the way you are, you just keep sprawling, you keep building in car dependence, you are just heading for a disaster.
Just spreading means 2-3 cars per household as long as the horizon goes, and that keeps more pressure on the roads and more gasoline, more pollution, you name it.
Building car-oriented infrastructure creates urban sprawl. In spite of this, Auckland is actually not as spread out as some would have us believe. According to the most comprehensive survey of international urban densities available, Auckland has 2,000 inhabitants per square kilometre. That's third highest out of the 9 cities in Australia, Canada and New Zealand with populations of 1 million or more. Add in the US cities of the same size and Auckland slips to 7th place. 7th, that is, out of 45.
Residentially, Auckland isn't particularly dispersed. Again, it's obviously dispersed compared with European cities, but its population density is comparable with Sydney's, higher than most Australian cities, comparable with most Canadian cities, higher than most US cities. That's because land use planning regulations have been in force over that whole period that have prevented the kind of freewheeling subdivision of the entire rural hinterland that you see in US cities and in fact around Brisbane in Australia as well.
Much further down that density list is Perth in Western Australia. But over the last 2 decades, Perth has invested heavily in improving its public transport system and in particular its rail network. Professor Peter Newman played a key role in making that happen. He's one of the world's most respected authorities on sustainable cities and transportation. He's written several books on these matters, one of which was launched at the White House in 1999 with Vice President Al Gore. He's also well known for inventing the term automobile dependence.
For someone growing up in a city like Auckland or Perth, it's not hard to know what automobile dependence is because it's all we ever knew or have known. It's basically that you have to go everywhere by car because it's the only serious option you've got. You might take the odd bus, but you certainly don't build your life around it. We really reached the end point of that when in 1979 they closed our railway down, and at that point the public was faced with whether we went down that track or whether we went down an upgraded, extended, expanded rail system. Now I led the campaign, if you like. The Friends of the Railways was started in 1979 and we began that campaign. At every stage we've found enormous public support for what we've been doing, and that public support has been translated into political realities. We keep winning elections on it. And the old diesel rail system that we had, we were able to sell that off at a very cheap price to Auckland, and they've just been chugging along out there. Very slow option still. You don't have a decent rail option until you get an electric system that can go at 100 kilometres an hour down those corridors.
One of the things that made electrification look viable in Perth was they were going to have to replace those old trains anyway because they were getting so clapped out that they could hardly be run anymore. 15 years later, I caught one in Auckland yesterday. Now, they've been jazzed up a little bit on the inside, but it really is, it's embarrassing for a first world city of over 1 million people that kind of thing should be allowed to continue.
When it was posed, the Northern Suburbs Railways was seen, well, why don't you just use buses? There's nothing wrong with that. Public didn't want it, so we built the railway. It's now carrying the equivalent of 7 lanes of traffic. And that's in an area where you could not build those 7 lanes of traffic.
A single rail line, for instance, has almost 10 times the peak capacity than a single motorway lane does. So if you're looking to find ultimate solutions to congestion in Auckland, the last thing you do would be building a road.
The Southern Suburbs Railway is a visionary project that will deliver a fast, direct, efficient train service to the fast-growing suburbs south of Perth and will be linked to an expanded bus network. New state-of-the-art rail cars are being delivered to service the existing network and the new line.
The Southern Railway will carry at least that, probably more, and that takes a huge load off our need to build that kind of infrastructure. But the most important thing, and I keep saying it, is that it changes the land use planning. People start to perceive it's good to live near and work near the rail system. They would never have done that if it had been a bus system, even a busway, and they certainly don't do it with freeways. You keep away from them. Time and again, the market survey showed that people thought the railway was the best thing the Labor government has ever done.
Unfortunately, our own Labor government doesn't seem keen on emulating the Perth success story.
Perth, of course, is a very different shape to Auckland and has very different opportunities in terms of rail transport. Auckland has 2 rail lines with no real prospect of building any further rail lines.
Cullen's arguments seem remarkably similar to those put forward by Auckland roading lobbyists, such as the Highway Action Trust, a group of wealthy Auckland businessmen who claim on their website that Perth is different to Auckland because it is developed all along the coast and that this is where the rail line runs.
Well, Auckland is a linear city. I don't understand that argument. We're a linear city. We're not all just along the coast. It goes and the railway line, in fact, isn't along the coast. It's further inland. There's no reason at all why that Minister for Finance shouldn't be invited to Perth to have a look, and people in his own party would be happy to show him around. I'd have to say that I find the road lobby in Auckland to be one of the nastiest in the world, and I know some pretty nasty ones, but they pull out the most extraordinary arguments. It's like they aren't that honest, really. I mean, and the reality is they aren't.
The Highway Action Trust also make the claim, contrary to all evidence, that Perth is 25% denser than Auckland. In fact, the only other place this strange statistic can be found is in this pamphlet produced by the Automobile Association, who it seems were spending money people gave them in case of this, on this, a piece of pre-election propaganda sent to 190,000 Aucklanders telling them why rail wasn't a good idea and why they should just use buses, and of course why buses needed more roads. Again, Michael Cullen seemed to be reading from the same script.
I think it is fair to say that the bulk of public transport in Auckland will be provided by the bus services, and I've suggested frequently to Auckland the best slogan that they can have in terms of public transport is buses need roads too.
Line haul public transport in a city like Auckland should be conducted by rail, and so buses would run along local roads in order to feed the rail system, in order to link up across the suburbs. But in well-run public transport systems, there is no need for buses to use motorways. So it's a completely bogus argument, but it's a bogus argument that shows how deeply ignorant the Finance Minister's policy advisors are of what a well-run public transport system looks like.
Why is it that 100 US cities are building rail at the moment? So perhaps we'll have all the American cities and all the Australian cities, by the way, Brisbane, Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, are now following Perth in investing heavily in new rail projects. Perhaps Auckland will be the last city in the world to do it, but that's no great achievement, is it?